I want us to look at our Bibles this evening and not realize that we need to put ourselves as a Jew under the law of Moses. But in the 15th Psalm, we read of a psalm that's attributed to David. He's the one that is living at this time. The tabernacle, the temple that he was going to want to build, has not been built. But it's a psalm of David as he asks the question, who shall sojourn in your tabernacle? Who is going to be dwelling in your holy hill? There's Zion. And some of our translations have the word Zion connected with that. But I want us to look at that, even if we talk about the temple of God, one constructed in the wilderness, one that's time of David, which wasn't the temple that Solomon is going to build. It was always where the presence of God was. His person is in heaven. He's above all of things. Heaven can't hold him. But he is above those things, but his presence, his authoritative presence, would be there in his tabernacle, his tent, his temple. And when the temple of Solomon was dedicated in 1 Kings, the 8th chapter, he said, well, pray toward this place. That's where your name is. Not where your person is, it's where your name is. And therefore, I'm looking at this as the presence of a holy God. That he begins to ask the question, and he answers it. So we didn't have to wander too far away from this text. We won't. This is going to be where we'll stay. And realize that he asked the question, and that question is that indeed Jehovah, speaking to the Lord, who shall travel in thy tabernacle? So we're coming, the idea that we're coming on a journey and we're going to be in his tent. Whether that's, you want to think about the tabernacle, I'm thinking about a place to camp. I'm talking about a place I'm sojourning, and that's where I want to be. I want to be in the tabernacle or the tent where Jehovah's holy presence is. Who is going to be able to do that? That's David's question. And then he says, who's going to dwell? That doesn't mean I'm just going to sojourn and have a night over here and I'm gone. I want to sojourn, but I want to dwell. I want to dwell in your holy hill of Zion. So the holiness is emphasized. I'm sojourning, I'm traveling through life, but I want to dwell someplace. I want to be able to sojourn and be in your tent, O holy God. I want to be able to dwell in your holy hill. And that would mean something to the Jew as we're talking about Mount Zion and Jerusalem. But it also talks to us as God's people, striving to please God, knowing we're not holy, but God is. How can we ever be in a permanent place with a holy God? And he offers us 12 ways in which that can happen. And I want you to notice them in pairs. There are 6 pairs that are brought forth to us, and his answer. And the first one is, the ones who walk uprightly. What does it mean to walk upright? Well, they're working righteousness. Those two things go together. And we realize that there was a standard in which the Jews lived under, but we're under a different standard, and that standard is the gospel. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, Paul says, for it is the power of God of salvation. For therein, in what? In the gospel, is revealed the righteousness of God. How can I be right with God? Well, I need to be baptized for the remission of my sins. In Romans the 6th chapter, yes, that's going to happen. You obey that form of doctrine. And whereas you were servants of sin, where you were a bondservant of sin, now you're going to be a servant. You're going to be a bondservant of doing right. You're going to be a bondservant of righteousness. In verse 18. And what we begin to see in that chapter 6 and verse 18 is a sense that, hey, I've got to now be totally dedicated to doing what is right. I don't want to make fun of people who want to do right. That's not, we should ever do that. But I've heard people say, especially when you're questioning their doing right, those people over there, they like to bend over backwards to be straight. They like to bend over backwards to be straight. Like we're going to go way over here in order to be straight. Now, I may have to do that to sink a putt when you have a curve, and you may have to start over here to get it straight in the hole. But God doesn't ridicule people that way. People, the Pharisees, were involved in tithing the very minute particles of their herbs. Jesus didn't put that down. When you're trying to bend over backwards to be straight, no, they were tithing the very smallest amounts that they had. You should have done this and not leave the other done, which is grace and mercy and faith. How you treat your fellow man. They need grace. How you treat your fellow man. Not, oh, I'm doing good to God. Oh, they need mercy. How you treat your fellow man. You need to keep your word. Faithfulness. And that's the character. And they were leaving that alone. Well, you should have kept on doing these things, but don't leave the other things undone. But I'll tell you one thing that Jesus does condemn are those who think they're righteous. And we see that in a great story that's set forth where here is a lowly publican and here is a self-righteous Pharisee who is following his own standard, which was not the standard of God, but what he thinks ought to be right. And in his eyes, he is indeed righteous. And so Jesus talked about two men, one in the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other publican. The Pharisee stood and said within himself, God, I think thee I'm not like thee. Who is this guy? He trusted in themselves to be righteous, that they were righteous. What's the standard? It's not, I trust in myself. Whatever I say is right and we're doing what's right. No, it starts with the teachings of God. It starts with the standard of the gospel. And we want to strive to do that. And so when you walk uprightly, just walk straight. Don't have to bend over backwards to be straight. Walk straight according to God's standard, as imperfect as we are. Be merciful to me, a sinner. He went to his place of abiding justified. And the self-righteous Pharisee did not. And I tell you, you can dwell in my tent. You can abide in my holy hill of Zion. And that becomes a standard that we're to live in. God, what did you say is the right way to go? I'm striving to live that way. I don't double up doing super things so I can be looked upon as righteous. I just do what you say. And that'll be a pretty good way for us to live here as we walk before God. Secondly, this is the person that speaks truth. Oh, they don't lie. Oh, it's not just speaking truth. They speak truth in their own heart. And they won't slander others either. What a combination. What a way that we need to live. You speak truth to your own heart. What is hypocrisy to you? Well, hypocrisy is that I put a mask up here in front of my face and you're able to see somebody that I'm really not. That's hypocrisy. No, that's the effects of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy starts in your heart where you don't tell yourself the truth. You don't admit the truth about yourself. Now that's where we're supposed to live. Remember Matthew 23:28? To establish the point that hypocrisy begins in the heart, not outside when we make people think this way, that way, we're not. There's a lot of woes taking place, and every phrase is dealing with the scribes and Pharisees. They're a bunch of hypocrites. They're saying they're going to follow the standard of God. They're not. It's not that they do things so strict. Jesus said, go do the strictness. But don't follow the commandments of men and think you're doing the things of God. So in Matthew 23:28, he says, woe unto you, scribes, verse 27, for ye are whited sepulchres, which are white on the outward, and they appear so beautiful. There's our mask. That's what we want people to see. And inwardly are full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness. Dead men's bones, corruption, and uncleanness. What's in there? Even so you also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but inwardly you're full of hypocrisy. Where? Inwardly. Because you never tell yourself the truth. And therefore, why it becomes easy to be a hypocrite is that you haven't been telling yourself the truth anyway, so who cares what you see? Where do you stop hypocrisy? It starts, as all things, in the heart. And I just think that is so instructive, because sometimes we want to hide our true motives. Sometimes we want to hide what we really are. We still want to look good, so we tend to hypocrisy. When we really need to realize this is my true motive. This is my problem. And I don't want to face it. So it will be something else. And we may slander others. We may backbite against other people to cover our own lies to ourselves. That's what he's dealing with. And that's painful. And that's so destructive. It's so destructive. In Leviticus, the 19th chapter, and verse 16, look what we're studying Leviticus, and look what he puts together for us in verse 16. Thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people. You're walking here, walking there, and you're talking. You can talk, and you can talk, and you can talk about others. You passed over speaking truth to your heart. But now you're going to, as a talebearer among thy people, don't do that. Don't go around and throw a little bit here and a little bit there, and it's not the truth. But what's so much with truth? I haven't been true to myself. So I'm going to do that, and maybe they'll guard me slandering others. But look what he puts here with this. Neither shalt thou stand against the blood of thy neighbor. I am Jehovah. You're not going around as a talebearer, but you're not going to stand against the blood of your neighbor. I'm not going to ruin that person's life. That person's life is on the line. Did you know people's life is on the line with their reputation? And you can kill them with your slander and your backbiting. And that's something that should never be a part of our lives. And you know how you learn to face the truth of who you really are and work on it. We all need that. And it may keep others, because we won't be tearing down others. We won't be slandering them because we haven't really learned to speak truth in our heart. Oh, we speak truth. We know we're not to lie. But speak truth to yourself. That's so helpful. And God says, you can stay in my tent. You can be in my holy hill. The third connection is, doesn't do evil to his friends. Doesn't take up reproach against his neighbor. Doesn't do harm. Evil is not necessarily sinful things. It can be. In places it is. We don't want to do that. But we're not out here to hurt. We're not out here to hurt our neighbor or take up a reproach to shame them against ones you're close to, your neighbor. Talk about your friends. I think the New Testament gives us instruction where we can avoid that type of behavior. where we're going to be destructive in our relationships instead of instructive. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter, and it's a 4-letter word, it's not hate, it's love. And please note the characteristics of love, how it works, where you won't be doing evil or hurtful or harmful things to your friends, and not taking up a reproach of shame and said, how shameful your neighbor is. And when you have love, it's not going to work. It's not going to have a place to grow in our hearts. Love suffereth long and is kind, doesn't want to hurt. Love envieth not, doesn't vaunt itself. It's not easily, it doesn't puff up. It's not about self. Love is very selflessness. It's manifesting selflessness. It's seeking the well-being of others. And that's this relationship. So notice it's talking about myself and how I treat others. It does not behave itself in an unseemly manner, in a manner that is not proper. It doesn't seek its own. It's not easily provoked to anger or discouragement. It doesn't take account of evil, remembering evil of what people have done that's hurt us. No, love rejoiceth not in unrighteousness, because I'm working righteousness in my life. I'm trying to walk uprightly before God and before others. I don't rejoice in unrighteousness. I rejoice with the truth. Love is going to bear all things. It's going to believe all things. It's going to put the best meaning on people's motives instead of the worst it could ever be. And when reality sets in and their motives were not good, I'll hope all things. I'll hope they change. That's love. Believeth all things and hopeth all things. It endures all things. It never fails. I think that takes care of these two things real well. I don't want to take up something that shames my neighbor. I'm kind. I'm seeking their well-being. I don't want to do evil or hurtful things to my friends, because you're seeking their well-being. Now, you'll deal with the error. You'll deal with things that need to be changed. That's what we do with one another in a local church. 1 Thessalonians 5:14. Apostle Paul tells a lot of very quick things of instructions. But you are to admonish the disorderly. You're not to let that go unchecked, because we want to live righteous. We want to be righteous before God. We're living before a holy God, and we're going to admonish those who are out of step with God's law. We admonish the disorderly. Notice he says, encourage the faint-hearted. We can wear different hats as brethren in local church to deal with various difficulties that come. We're going to have to admonish the disorderly. We're going to be involved in encouraging the faint-hearted that are kind of giving up. We're going to support the weak. And we're going to be long-suffering toward everybody. You know, people are weak, they're disorderly, they're faint-hearted. Everybody needs long-suffering. And we're willing to do that to all. That's part of love. And when we put those two things together, we're going to show love of 1 Corinthians 13. We're not going to overlook the wrongs. We're going to try to help people work through the difficulties that they're having. We're not going to vaunt ourselves. It's not about us. It's about the well-being of another. Those things just kind of work because we love one another. We love one another, and that's what keeps us fruitful and right before God. And God says, you can dwell in my tent. And you've been sojourning, walking that path, you can spend the night there. And you can dwell there as long as you need. The fourth comparison, and whose eyes are reprobate is despised. Just talk about love. Yeah, we put on another hat too. And it's all living before God. In whose eyes of vain, reprobate, of some translation have vile, just people doing bad things. They're despised. While you're honoring those that fear Jehovah. Elisha was a great example of this. You had three kings coming together, and Elisha had been summoned by one who was a righteous king, the king of Judah. Verse 11, Jehoshaphat said, is there not a prophet of Jehovah that we may inquire of Jehovah by him? Because here was the king of Israel wanting to have these three kings together and kind of work out something as they're fighting against a common enemy. And one of the king of Israel's servants answered, said, Elisha, the son of Shaphat, is here, who poured water on the hands of Elijah. And Jehoshaphat said, the word of Jehovah is with him. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat and the king of Edom went down to him. And Elisha discerned. It wasn't hard to discern, but this is what he did. Elisha said unto the king of Israel, what have I to do with you? Get thee to the prophets of your father, and the prophets of thy mother. He said, we're going to listen to Elijah. You don't want to listen to Elijah. You go, Elisha, you go deal with the prophets that you've been wanting to hear. He despised him. And the king of Israel said, nay, for Jehovah had called these three kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab. And Elisha said, as Jehovah of hosts liveth, before whom I stand surely, were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat, I wouldn't even be looking at you. I wouldn't set my eyes on you. I despise you. Well, that's not loving. No, that's godly. That's recognizing those who fear the Lord and despising those who don't. And they've shown that. It's not, well, I think they're vile. But here were those following false prophets. And he recognized, if it weren't for the king that's good, I wouldn't be looking at you today. He's a great example of this. To have that kind of conviction for the truth of God, that we're willing to understand that, and my eyes can sense that without being a sinner, without being unloving. I'm being godly. I reverence God above everybody else. And it's a good place to be, but you're going to despise the evil person. And sometimes that's a little too harsh for people. That's why we need to be reminded. I wouldn't even be looking at you if it weren't that Jehoshaphat's here. They also swear to their own hurt. That's easy. But then they don't change. Oh, I make promises. And I even make it sound real harsh and real, it's going to be very tough on me if I don't fulfill my promises. As to my hurt. You know, I swear on my mother's grave or grandmother's grave. Well, that doesn't hurt you, does it? She's dead. What skin do you have in this game? None. But those are words. I honored my mother, I honored my grandmother, that's fine. But this is to your own hurt. Oh, Japheth, first thing that comes out of my house, I'll dedicate it unto you as his daughter. That probably hurt a little bit, but that's her. Whether she was put to death or whether she was going to be a virgin the rest of her life without the benefits of bringing children into the world. That was her. But this is to your own hurt. And when that fails, you do not change. You follow through. Because even if it's your own hurt, your word's your bond. That's godliness. That's the type of person that we're speaking about, and they don't change. I made an oath before God. That's the way it's going to be. Sometimes husbands and wives have to remind themselves that, when we got married, we made an oath, and that indeed through whether sickness and health, we're going to submit to our relationship. We're going to continue that relationship. And sometimes when one of the members gets sick, sometimes when they are ill and they can't do things, they sometimes say, just forget about me. No, we made an oath together. We're going to follow through that. Whether it becomes difficult or not, we do not change. That's a person living before God with all seriousness. And that's the person that's going to follow through with their promise. And when it becomes very difficult to do, they'll do it anyway. They don't put their money to interest. Uh-oh. Remember, we're talking about a Jew living under the old covenant. And when you see interest, some of the translations are dealing with the problem of usury, because a Jew could get interest from a person that wasn't a Jew. In Deuteronomy, the 23rd chapter, in verses 19 through 20, the law of God makes this distinction. Thou shalt not lend an interest to thy brother. Interest of money, interest of victuals, interest of anything that is lent upon interest, whether it's food or money. But unto a foreigner thou mayest lend upon interest. It's not interest is inherently evil. The word usury is a word in the Hebrew means to bite. It was harsh. And notice the context in which we find it in Leviticus, the 25th chapter, when he speaks about this problem of lending money of interest to thy brother. That was not to be done. But it's in a context when your brother is going through a difficult time. They need a little help. And in verse 35, if thy brother is waxed poor, and his hand fail with thee, thou shalt uphold him as, and he says, as a stranger and a sojourner shall he live with thee. Yeah, he gonna pay interest of the food I give him, of the money I lend him. No, you're not. Take thou no interest of him or increase, but fear thy God, that thy brother may live with thee. Thou shalt not give him thy money upon interest, nor give him thy victuals for increase. I am Jehovah your God, who brought you forth out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. And what we see is that here they were going to a land and they were to treat their brethren that way. It wasn't going to be, this would be a biting situation. I don't have anything to give you, but when you pay me back, you're going to have to pay with interest. No, you're not. That was what a righteous person under the law of Moses. I don't put my money to interest with my brethren. And the side note of that, what goes with that, you do not take a reward against the innocent. That's bribery. In Exodus, the 23rd chapter, notice how that's put together by God. Thou shalt take no bribe, for a bribe blindeth them that have sight, and perverteth the words of the righteous. Oh, that's what I'm supposed to be working, righteousness. Bribery perverts that. I just didn't see it that way this time. But you saw what happened. You knew reality. And somebody paid you off. What it does, it blinds the people who saw. I just didn't see it. Really? Do you speak truth to your own heart? Are you swearing to your own hurt? And you're not going to change your position? What a corrupt person that's going to do that. But it's not going to work with somebody who wants to dwell in the presence of a holy God. And words of righteousness, it's going to pervert the words of the righteous. Look who is going to be guilty of those things. We think, how could you do that to somebody? If you have a love of money, it will be easy to do. If money moves you, these are going to be difficult things to overcome. But if God moves you, it's not going to have that power, because you know what God says. So there's the kindness, there's the love, there's taking care, them letting them live with me if I have to help them through the difficult times. You're not going to have to pay interest. And we're going to tell the truth what happened. And there's no amount of money that can buy you off. That's kind of what we're dealing with. Those are those 12. And what he says, you will never be moved from our holy God at the end. And what's happening, we kind of put those together. I'm going to walk uprightly. I'm working righteousness. I'm going to be the one who speaks truth to my own heart. I want to be honest with myself. What was my motive in that action? I'll be honest with myself, because that helps me find remedies. And in doing so, I won't be slandering others. I'm surely not going to lie about somebody else to satisfy my own unwillingness to face my issue. I will not slander others in the process. I will be one that in whose eyes a reprobate will be despised. I'm not going to give them quarter. I'm not going to say, God bless you, go your way, and everything's just fine, when I know things aren't fine with relationship to God. I want to honor those who fear Jehovah. And I don't want to hurt my friends or my neighbors. I'm not going to do them evil. I'm going to speak truth to them. I'm going to admonish the disorderly. I'm going to encourage the faint-hearted. I'm going to support the weak. I'm very flexible as a Christian to what the need is. But I'm going to be long-suffering toward all. We all need that. But I'm not going to hurt them. And then we've learned he swears to his own hurt. She does, and doesn't change. They will fulfill their promise, even though it's going to be a hardship on them. They made their promise, and they will live by it. And they will suffer by it. And will not be guilty of usury or bribery, because they not motivated by money. What's interesting to me is not only the blessing is you'll never be moved from your holy God. You'll never be moved. That's who God says, those are people going to stay in my land. Those are people going to stay in my holy temple. Those are going to be the people that are going to be standing as the church that belongs to Jesus Christ. Because it's made up of people like this. But he says something at the end He that doeth these things, in essence, he that does this will never be moved. They will dwell, they will sojourn in my tabernacle, in my holy hill of Zion. 5 of them are negative. 5 of them are you're not supposed to do. 7 of them I'm supposed to do it. Look at it that way. 5 of them you're not supposed to do. Do these things. There's things that we're not going to do. We're going to restrain ourselves. We're going to not go that route. In order to accomplish that, I can't slander others. I'm not going to hurt my friends and my neighbors. I'm not going to be guilty of lending with interest and using bribery to pervert justice. I'm not going to do those things. These things do. And you will not be moved from our holy God's holy temple. Well, if you do these things, walk uprightly, do all this. But the negative part, the things you don't do are the things you do. You don't do those things. There's things you do, there's things you restrain yourself from doing. And when that happens, you become well-balanced. You become the type of person that God says, that's the one that's going to never be moved from my holy presence. And I'm just thinking, when we have a church made up of people like this, difficulties can come. Difficulties in our life can come. We can work through COVID. We can work through all sorts of things. And we can do that successfully because every one of us are putting these things into practice. Wanting this, putting this into practice. And I just think they would be very helpful in times that are difficult to remember this is what God says his people look like. And may we strive to look like that. Tonight, if you're not a Christian, I want to encourage you to become one, living before God. We're not doing that from the Jewish point of view of the law of Moses. But we have the gospel. Therein is revealed the righteousness of God. How can I be righteous before God? I'm going to have to put my trust in Jesus Christ, who died for me. He was raised for my justification. I'm willing to confess that he is the Son of God. Put my trust in him totally and be baptized into his death. Believing he was raised from the dead, I'll have a faith in God he'll raise me up to walk in a newness of life. I got a lot of things to work on in my character. May God give you the time in order to become the type of people that you want to be. But being right with God in Christ is where we begin. And then we can put into practice the things, even principles we've learned this evening, but to be a child of God. And to realize I want to be helpful to the people that I'm around. And I'll tell you what we've learned tonight, you will be helpful to every individual. Everybody will be useful in the kingdom if we said, I want to be dwelling in God's holy presence. And I know now how to do that. So if you are at that point of responding to the gospel, don't put that off. We're here to help you. We're here to assist you. Come as we stand and as we sing.